Holding the ultrasound image in her hands, Loa was overwhelmed with happiness. She couldn't wait to see the look on Cassian's face when he found out they were about to welcome a new member into their family. But everything quickly fell apart when she saw her husband opening a car door for another woman and helping her into the passenger seat outside the hospital. He had told her he was meeting a client, but it turned out that the client was another woman who was also pregnant. For the past few days, Loa had been feeling off. Every time she ate, a wave of nausea followed. A sour sensation lingered in her stomach, leaving her uncomfortable throughout the day. At first, she assumed her old gastritis was acting up again. Back in college, she had developed stomach problems from the pressure of maintaining top grades while working toward an honors degree. She had always pushed herself hard, believing that a strong academic record would help her build a better future. After dealing with the symptoms for several days, Loa decided to take a few hours off work and visit the hospital. She didn't want Cassian worrying about her, so she kept it to herself and scheduled the appointment without telling him. As she stepped through the entrance of Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis, her phone rang. "Hey, babe," she answered with a smile. "Sorry, sweetheart. I won't be able to make lunch today," Cassian said warmly. "I've got a client meeting. Go ahead and eat without me. I'll make it up to you later." "Meeting with a client?" Loa asked. "Yeah, that's right," he replied after a brief pause. "I've got to go. Talk to you later." The call ended almost immediately. Loa glanced at her phone for a moment before slipping it back into her purse. She didn't think much of it. Cassian had been busy lately, and she trusted him completely. Turning toward the hospital lobby, she walked inside for her appointment. Loa and Cassian had known each other since college. They attended the same university in St. Louis. Loa came from a well-off family. She was an only child and had always been deeply loved by her father. Despite growing up in comfort, she was never arrogant. She was kind, hardworking, and got along well with everyone around her. Cassian, on the other hand, came from a very difficult background. His mother had passed away when he was young, and his father later remarried. At first, his stepmother treated him well, but things changed after she had children of her own. From then on, he no longer received the same care and attention from his family. Even as a college student, Cassian was a handsome young man. He was tall and strongly built. Because he had to support both his education and daily living expenses, he worked several jobs after classes every day. One day, Loa attended a friend's birthday party. Her friends kept persuading her to stay longer, so she ended up leaving much later than planned. The road from the party to her house passed through several quiet stretches, and she couldn't help feeling uneasy. As she rode through an intersection and entered a deserted section of the highway, 3 rough-looking young men suddenly stepped out and blocked her path. Loa's heart skipped a beat. She immediately backed up, but the men quickly surrounded her. "Well, look at that. Where are you going this late, sweetheart?" One of them mocked with a grin. "Come hang out with us. We know a fun place." As they spoke, they grabbed her arm and tried to pull her off her scooter. "Who are you? Let me go. I'll scream," Loa shouted. The men burst into laughter. "Then scream," one of them sneered. "Go ahead. Let's see if anybody hears you out here." As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed her chin. Loa struggled to break free, but before she could react, a hard slap landed across her face. She had grown up cherished and protected by her parents. Never in her life had anyone laid a hand on her. The shock and fear overwhelmed her. Tears streamed from her eyes as she begged them to let her go, but the men had no intention of doing that. In that moment, Loa felt as if her life was about to be ruined forever. Just as Loa was losing hope, a voice suddenly rang out from nearby. "Let her go, or I'm calling the police." The 3 men turned around and saw a young man riding a bicycle straight toward them. "What are you doing? Let her go right now," he shouted. "Who the hell are you?" One of the men barked back. "Stay out of this unless you're looking for trouble." Another stepped forward and pointed at him threateningly. The 3 men rushed him at once. Loa watched in shock. 3 against 1. She thought the young man would be beaten badly, but instead, one after another, the attackers were knocked to the ground. Then one of them suddenly pulled out a knife and charged. Seeing the blade aimed at him, Loa cried out in panic, "Watch out!" At that moment, the young man was grappling with another attacker. As he turned to kick him away, the knife slid across his arm. Blood immediately appeared on the sleeve of his shirt and began running down his forearm. Ignoring the injury, he struck the man holding the knife and sent him crashing onto the pavement. Realizing they were outmatched, the 3 men scrambled to their feet and fled. Only after they disappeared did Loa run toward her rescuer. Looking at the blood on his arm, she asked anxiously, "Sir, your arm is hurt. Are you okay?" Under the dim streetlights, where patches of light and shadow mixed beneath the trees, Loa finally recognized the face before her. It was Cassian, her classmate from college. "Cassian, it's you?" she asked in disbelief. "Loa?" he replied, equally surprised. The moment she realized she was standing in front of someone she knew, all the fear she had been holding back came pouring out. Tears filled her eyes as she broke down crying. "Thank goodness. I can't believe it was you. If you hadn't shown up." She couldn't finish her sentence. Her body was still shaking from what had happened. Cassian gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. You're safe now." "But why were you out here so late? This area is usually deserted. Those kinds of people are always hanging around here." Sniffling, Loa answered, "I went to a friend's birthday party. Everyone kept asking me to stay longer, so I ended up leaving late. Your arm is hurt. Sit down. Let me bandage it for you." As she spoke, Loa reached into her purse, took out the handkerchief she always carried with her, and gently guided Cassian to sit down on the curb. Under the soft yellow glow of the streetlights, she carefully wrapped the cloth around his wound. Her cheeks were still slightly flushed from crying. Her small hands moved gently and attentively as she bandaged his arm. Cassian couldn't take his eyes off her. He watched her delicate face, her soft features, and the way she focused on treating his injury. For a moment, everything around him seemed to fade away. "There," Loa said at last, lifting her head. "Luckily, it's only a surface wound. Just keep it clean, and don't let it get infected." As she looked up, she realized how close they were sitting. Their faces were only inches apart. Embarrassment immediately crept across her face. Cassian seemed not to have heard a word she said. He was still staring at her. The two of them remained like that for a few seconds before Loa awkwardly cleared her throat. "Your arm. I've finished bandaging it." Cassian finally came back to his senses and quickly looked away. "Thank you." He glanced at the bandaged arm before speaking again. "It's getting late. Let me take you home." After what had just happened, Loa didn't want to risk running into trouble again. She quietly nodded. She rode ahead while Cassian followed behind on his bicycle. Streetlights stretched down the road like rows of glowing crystals. Stars sparkled above them in the night sky. The world seemed quieter than usual as everything else faded into the background, leaving only two figures moving forward through the night. Still shaken by the incident, Loa never stopped to wonder why Cassian had happened to be out there at that hour, or how he had appeared at exactly the right moment to save her. When they finally reached her house, she reminded him once more to take care of his injury, change the bandage regularly, and thanked him again before opening the front door and stepping inside. Cassian remained outside until he was sure she was safe, then turned his bicycle around and headed back to his small apartment. After returning home, Loa couldn't stop thinking about what had happened that night. Again and again, the image of Cassian stepping in to protect her appeared in her mind. She remembered the way he had stood in front of her, the injury on his arm, and the calm way he had reassured her after everything was over. From that night on, she began to feel something different whenever she thought about him. Using his injury as an excuse, she often checked on him and helped him change the bandage. Sometimes, she brought meals that her mother had prepared and invited him to eat with her. As they spent more time together, they talked about many things. Through those conversations, Loa came to understand more about Cassian's difficult life and everything he had gone through. Feeling sorry for his situation, she told her parents about him. When her parents learned that Cassian was the young man who had saved their daughter, they were deeply grateful. They also sympathized with his circumstances and began helping him with tuition, living expenses, and other necessities. As time passed, Loa and Cassian realized that their feelings for each other had grown into something more. Before long, they officially started dating. They shared a beautiful period of their lives together. Because Loa's parents approved of the relationship and supported them wholeheartedly, the two of them got married not long after graduating from college. With the support of Loa's family and his own abilities, Cassian's career continued to grow. After graduation, he started his own company and gradually built it into a successful business. Loa chose a different path. She worked for a major corporation in St. Louis, one of the city's most influential companies. From the very beginning, they had agreed to respect each other's choices and trust one another. Both of them wanted independent careers, and neither wanted workplace disagreements to affect their marriage. Because of that, even after Cassian established his own company, he never pressured Loa to leave her job and work for him. He respected her decisions and supported her ambitions. Having received so much help from Loa's family over the years, Cassian also treated her parents with kindness and respect. To everyone around them, they appeared to be a happy couple who had built a successful life together through love, trust, and hard work. Returning to the present, Loa held the test results the doctor had just handed her. A rush of emotions filled her chest. "Congratulations," the doctor said, while pointing at the ultrasound screen. "You're about 4 weeks pregnant." The doctor showed her a tiny dark spot on the image. "This little one right here is already developing." Before she left, the doctor reminded her that the first trimester was still a delicate stage. She needed to be careful, avoid unnecessary strain, and get plenty of rest. Following the doctor's finger across the screen, Loa felt a happiness unlike anything she had ever experienced. Her heart was full of excitement, wonder, and disbelief. Was this what it felt like to become a mother for the first time? The feeling was even more overwhelming because this was the child she and Cassian had been hoping for during the past 2 years. They had been married for 3 years but still hadn't had a baby. During their first year of marriage, Cassian had been focused on building his business while Loa was just beginning her career. They had also wanted time alone together as newlyweds, so they agreed not to rush into having children. By the second year, her parents had started asking about grandchildren every time they visited. Around the same time, Cassian's company had become more stable, while Loa had proven herself at work and earned a promotion to marketing director. She was the youngest person ever appointed to the position in the company's history. Although she was talented, her young age made management difficult at first. Many older employees questioned her authority and constantly challenged her decisions. But thanks to her sharp thinking and strong understanding of the market, she successfully led several projects that others had nearly given up on. Gradually, her coworkers began to respect both her abilities and her leadership. The downside was that she worked too hard. The stress took a toll on her health, and her menstrual cycle became irregular. Even after 2 years without birth control, she and Cassian still hadn't received the news they had been waiting for. During a medical checkup, a doctor once told her that if she wanted to get pregnant, she needed to reduce her workload, manage stress, and take better care of herself. But Loa loved her work too much to slow down. Leaving the examination room, she felt as though she were floating. Her hand rested gently on her stomach. She was going to be a mother. A tiny life was growing inside her. From now on, she needed to think about her child, take care of herself, and make sure the baby developed well. Her mind immediately filled with plans. She thought about healthier meals, better rest, prenatal classes she could attend with Cassian, and spending less time at the office. For the first time in years, she was determined not to put work above everything else. The list kept growing in her head, almost like she was preparing a major marketing campaign. But this was much more important. This was the child she and her husband had dreamed of for so long. She decided she would surprise Cassian with the news. Just imagining the look on his face when he found out he was going to be a father made her smile to herself. Filled with excitement, Loa walked out of the hospital. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She could hardly contain her happiness. Then, something caught her eye. The ultrasound photo slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. Loa stood motionless, staring at the scene in front of her. Even in her worst nightmares, she had never imagined she would see something like this. It was Cassian. He was carefully helping a woman walk toward a black car. The woman was visibly pregnant, her belly already large. Cassian opened the passenger door for her and gently helped her into the seat. Then he leaned inside and fastened her seatbelt himself. Moments later, he got behind the wheel and drove away. Loa finally snapped out of her shock. Without thinking, she hurried to her car and followed him. Her mind had gone completely blank. She could no longer process what she had just seen. The only thing she could focus on was the black car ahead of her. Through the heavy lunchtime traffic, she struggled to keep up. Several times, she nearly lost sight of it. After a long chase, the black car finally slowed down and stopped in front of a large estate. The gates opened automatically, and the vehicle disappeared inside. A storm of thoughts rushed through Loa's mind as she slowly drove closer to the gates. Looking through the entrance, she saw Cassian stepping out of the car. He walked around to the passenger side and carefully helped the pregnant woman out. Then, right in front of her eyes, he leaned forward and kissed the woman's cheek. The two of them smiled at each other before walking hand in hand toward the house. Neither of them noticed the woman standing outside the gates watching everything unfold. Tears streamed down Loa's face. She couldn't bring herself to go inside. She didn't have the courage to confront what she had just witnessed. Cassian had betrayed her, the man she had loved for years. The man who had built a life with her, the man who had shared every struggle, every success, and every dream. The husband she believed would stay beside her until the end of their lives had betrayed her, and she had never even seen it coming. Memories flooded her mind, their promises, their vows, their happy moments together. Each memory cut deeper than the last. Her chest tightened until breathing became difficult. Everything felt like a lie. One question after another echoed through her thoughts. Why? Why had Cassian done this to her? Why had he treated her this way? Why had everything turned out like this? The world she had spent years building seemed to collapse around her. Then Loa remembered the baby growing inside her. Her hands slowly moved to her stomach as a wave of pain washed over her. "What am I supposed to do now, little one?" she whispered. She remained there for a long time, staring blankly ahead. Her thoughts were in complete disarray. She no longer knew what to believe, what to do, or where to go from there. The future she had imagined only minutes earlier had been shattered before her eyes. The joy of becoming a mother had been replaced by fear, heartbreak, and uncertainty. Eventually, she turned and walked back toward her car. Her steps were slow and unsteady, as if all her strength had been drained away. What Loa didn't realize was that someone had witnessed everything from the very beginning. A man stood some distance away, silently watching as the entire scene unfolded. It was Malachi, a former classmate who had attended the same university as Loa and Cassian years ago. Malachi had fallen for Loa the very first time he saw her during freshman orientation at the university, but he was naturally quiet and reserved, the kind of person who kept his feelings to himself. Time and time again, he wanted to tell her how he felt, yet he never found the courage. Part of him worried that they hadn't known each other long enough for her to trust him. Whenever he looked at Loa's bright, gentle face, his heart grew restless. Back then, there seemed to be room for only one person in his mind, and that person was Loa. He spent a long time debating whether to confess. Then one day, just as he finally decided to take the risk, he discovered that Loa and Cassian were already dating. From that moment on, he buried his feelings and carried his unspoken love through the rest of college. 4 years passed quickly. The day Loa and Cassian got married was also the day Malachi left for Canada to pursue his master's degree and prepare for the future responsibilities waiting for him in his family's business. He spent 2 years earning his degree and another year gaining practical experience to strengthen his knowledge. After 3 years abroad, he returned to St. Louis to begin preparing for leadership at Vaughn Holdings. During those years, he focused entirely on studying and building his future. He never seriously considered another relationship. Yet somewhere deep inside, the image of Loa had never completely disappeared. Malachi also had an adopted sister named Soraya. His parents had taken her in when she was 12 years old. To them, Soraya was intelligent, capable, and well-mannered. They hoped that one day she and Malachi would marry so she could help him manage the family business. But Malachi had always viewed Soraya as nothing more than a sister. He also knew she was not as perfect as she appeared on the surface, so he had repeatedly delayed every attempt to push them together. During his first few days back in St. Louis, he wasn't in a hurry to step into his executive role. Instead, he wanted to spend time exploring the city and seeing how much it had changed during the 3 years he had been away. Then, that very morning, he unexpectedly spotted the woman he had once loved rushing off in a panic. Something about her behavior seemed unusual. Without thinking, he followed. That decision brought him to the estate where he silently watched everything unfold from a distance, from the moment Loa arrived until the moment her world fell apart. Loa drove home without realizing that someone was following her from a distance. After entering the house, she picked up her phone and called Cassian. The phone rang for a long time before he finally answered. "Hey, sweetheart, finished with your client meeting?" she asked, doing her best to sound normal. "Yeah, I'm back at the office," Cassian replied in the same warm voice she had always known. "I'm having my assistant prepare the contract so we can get everything signed." Not a trace of hesitation could be heard in his voice. Loa felt a bitter ache in her chest. How could he lie so calmly? How could he deceive her and act as if nothing had happened? Her emotions churned inside her. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "Cassian," she said softly. "Yeah? Can you come home a little early tonight? There's something I want to talk to you about." "Sure, I'll be home early," he replied, without changing his tone. Then he quickly ended the call. Loa stared at the screen as the disconnected tone echoed through the room. Slowly, she sank onto the sofa. Her phone slipped from her hand and fell onto the floor. Her thoughts kept returning to the child growing inside her. Tears rolled down her face one after another. What would happen to her baby if it grew up without a father? Why did this child have to face such heartbreak before even being born? Why had Cassian betrayed her? On the other side of town, Nyla had overheard the phone conversation. She had been listening carefully, afraid that Cassian might leave to see his wife. Wanting to keep him with her, she suddenly pressed a hand against her stomach and frowned. "Cassian, my stomach hurts," she said softly, leaning against him. "I don't feel well." Immediately, Cassian moved closer and gently rubbed her belly. Seeing that she had his full attention, Nyla continued in a sweet, pleading voice. "Stay here with us tonight, okay? I get scared being here alone. The baby misses you too." All of Cassian's attention shifted to comforting her. In the process, he completely forgot the promise he had made to Loa. That night, he never came home. Meanwhile, Loa waited for hours. As the night grew later, the silence inside the house became harder and harder to bear. Every passing minute made the pain in her chest heavier. She felt exhausted and wanted nothing more than to sleep and forget everything that had happened that day. But sleep never came. What she didn't know was that a silver gray car had been parked quietly outside her house for hours. Inside sat a man watching the light from her bedroom window. Malachi remained there for a long time before finally starting the engine and driving away. Early the next morning, Cassian returned home. As if nothing had happened, he quickly changed clothes and got ready for work. Following his usual routine, he walked into the bedroom and gently kissed Loa on the cheek. Loa had heard him come home earlier, but she pretended to be asleep. She still didn't know how to face the truth. When she felt his lips touch her cheek, anger, disappointment, and humiliation surged through her. Countless harsh words filled her mind, yet she remained completely still and kept her eyes closed. At 9 o'clock that morning, Loa stood in front of the estate she had seen the day before and pressed the doorbell. Inside, Nyla slowly made her way to the door, one hand supporting her pregnant belly. "Who could be showing up this early?" she muttered irritably. When the door opened and she saw Loa standing there, the color drained from her face. She hadn't expected Loa to find the place. Loa," she stammered. Loa stared at her. The woman's face looked strangely familiar. She felt certain they had met before, but for a moment she couldn't remember where. Then it came back to her. Nyla had been Cassian's former executive assistant. Years ago, Cassian had casually mentioned that she had resigned from the company. Because she trusted her husband and respected his work, Loa had never asked any questions. She had simply accepted the explanation and moved on. Now she finally understood the real reason Nyla had left. Although Loa knew very little about Nyla, Nyla knew exactly who Loa was. After recovering from the initial shock, Nyla lifted her chin and spoke with open defiance. She was carrying Cassian's child and no longer felt threatened by his wife. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Loa looked directly at her. "How long have you and my husband been involved with each other?" Nyla let out a mocking laugh. "You're really a pathetic wife, aren't you?" she said. "You don't even know what's going on in your own marriage." The sneer on her face grew wider. "We've been together for more than a year. When I got pregnant, Cassian didn't want me working anymore, so he let me quit and focus on the baby. He treats me very well. He buys me designer gifts. He takes care of everything. This estate? He paid for it." Nyla placed a hand on her belly and smiled proudly. "And now I'm carrying his child, his flesh and blood. Cassian says I'm amazing. Not useless like someone who's been married for years and still couldn't get pregnant." Before Nyla could say another word, a sharp slap landed across her face. Caught off guard, she stumbled backward and nearly lost her balance. One hand immediately flew to her stomach. Loa's eyes were cold. "And what exactly are you so proud of?" she said. "You're sleeping with another woman's husband. Everything you have came from taking what belongs to someone else." Loa had always been gentle and calm, but beneath that calm exterior was a strong and decisive woman. The betrayal had wounded her deeply, yet she refused to let herself be humiliated without a response. Nyla glared at her and slapped her back. The two women struggled with each other in front of the house. Then Nyla spotted a familiar black car approaching in the distance. She instantly recognized it as Cassian's. An idea flashed through her mind. The moment he got close enough to see, she deliberately threw herself backward and cried out while clutching her belly. "My stomach! It hurts!" Cassian slammed on the brakes and rushed toward her. He quickly helped Nyla to her feet. The moment he looked up, his eyes landed on Loa. The coldness in his expression struck her harder than any physical blow. For years, he had always looked at her with affection and warmth. Now there was only anger and hostility. Loa felt as if she were looking at a stranger. Before she could process what was happening, Nyla began crying. "Cassian, she pushed me. She tried to hurt our baby." Sob after sob shook her body. Loa grabbed Cassian's arm. That's not what happened. Listen to me. She never got the chance to finish. A powerful slap struck her across the face. The force caught her completely off guard. She lost her balance and crashed to the ground. A sharp pain shot through her body. Then she saw it. Blood. A thin stream of red slowly spread beneath her. Terror flooded her face. Both hands moved instinctively to her stomach. The baby, she cried. Cassian, our baby. Save our baby. Cassian stared at her in shock, unable to understand what he was seeing. Before he could react, another man rushed forward. Malachi dropped to his knees beside Loa and carefully gathered her into his arms. Loa forced her eyes open and looked at the face above her. The image came in and out of focus. Everything around her was becoming distant. A second later, darkness swallowed her consciousness, and she collapsed in Malachi's arms. At St. Louis Medical Center, one of the most prestigious hospitals in the city, Malachi sat silently outside the operating room. Blood had stained the front of his white dress shirt, but he seemed completely unaware of it. The tall, broad-shouldered man remained seated with his hands clasped together, as though praying for a miracle. A short time later, the operating room doors opened and a doctor stepped outside. Who was the patient's family member? The doctor asked. Malachi immediately stood and walked over. I am. How is she? The doctor's expression turned sympathetic. The pregnancy was still in its early stages. The impact was too severe, and the bleeding couldn't be controlled. Her physical condition was already weak. We weren't able to save the baby. Malachi's face tightened. The doctor continued. We need to perform surgery immediately. Please come with me and sign the necessary paperwork. While all of this was happening, Cassian was still at the other hospital. He wanted to go see Loa, but Nyla kept complaining about stomach pain and refused to let him leave. Despite his affair, Cassian had never planned on divorcing his wife. The truth was that he still cared about Loa. He also couldn't ignore everything Loa's family had done for him over the years. Like many selfish men, he wanted both worlds without having to give up either one. After the surgery, Loa was transferred to a recovery room. She lay unconscious on the hospital bed, her face pale and exhausted. Malachi quietly opened the door and stepped inside. His eyes moved around the room before settling on her face. 3 years had passed, yet she still looked the same. He gently took her hand and held it between both of his. I always thought you were living a happy life, he murmured. I never imagined I would find you like this. I hope when you wake up, you'll be strong enough to face the truth and keep moving forward. As he spoke, he lifted her hand to his lips. The warmth of his breath brushed against her skin. A few moments later, Loa slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the unfamiliar man sitting beside her bed. Who are you? She asked weakly. Where am I? Malachi looked at her gently. You're in the hospital. Loa frowned. Why are you here? She asked. Do you remember me, Loa? At first, she stared at him in confusion. Then recognition appeared in her eyes. Wait, Malachi? Is that really you? Malachi simply nodded. Suddenly, memories of what had happened came rushing back. Loa immediately placed a trembling hand on her stomach. Fear filled her face. My baby, she whispered. What about my baby? Malachi didn't know how to answer. He remained silent. That silence told her everything. A broken cry escaped her lips. My baby, my baby. Tears poured down her face. He killed my baby. Her emotions spiraled out of control. Seeing how distressed she had become, Malachi quickly called for a doctor. A nurse administered a sedative, and before long, Loa drifted back into a deep sleep. While she rested, Malachi left the room to buy necessities for her, along with food and fruit for when she woke up. After finally calming Nyla down, Cassian hurried to the hospital. He asked a nurse which room Loa had been taken to and headed there immediately. When he entered, he found her asleep on the bed. He sat quietly beside her for a while. Learning that he had lost the child stirred some sadness inside him, but the feeling quickly faded when he remembered that Nyla was still carrying his son. After sitting there for some time, he got up to leave. He had promised to take Nyla out to make up for the shock she had gone through earlier. Just as he reached the door, Loa woke up. Cassian stopped and turned around. The moment she saw him, her eyes turned red with anger. You killed our baby, she said through clenched teeth. Give my child back. Her voice was weak, but the pain behind it was unmistakable. Why are you even here? Get out. Just get out. Despite her condition, she tried to hit him, pouring all of her grief, rage, and heartbreak into every movement. Cassian sat back down and tried to comfort her. He apologized. He spoke softly. He asked for forgiveness, but Loa could no longer hear any of it. In the span of a single day, she had suffered the two greatest losses of her life. Her husband had betrayed her, and her child was gone. Worse still, the man responsible was sitting right in front of her. "You're a monster," she cried. "You cheated on me, and now you've killed our baby. I'll never forgive you." Tears soaked her pale face as she struck him again and again. This time, Cassian's patience finally snapped. He grabbed her wrist tightly. "Stop it, Loa," he shouted. "You couldn't protect the baby, and now you're blaming everything on me?" Before Loa could respond, the hospital room door swung open. Malachi had just returned. The moment he saw Cassian gripping Loa's wrist while she sat on the bed in tears, anger flashed across his face. Without hesitation, he strode forward and shoved Cassian away from her. "Get your hands off her!" he snapped. Cassian staggered backward. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "And why are you sticking your nose into my family?" Malachi's expression remained cold. "You don't need to know who I am." His voice was calm, but the warning behind it was unmistakable. He stepped between Cassian and the hospital bed, shielding Loa from him. Then he turned around and gently supported her shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Cassian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at the two of them. A mocking smile slowly appeared on his face. "So that's what this is?" he said bitterly. "You accuse me of betrayal while you're sitting here with another man." His eyes narrowed. "Are you even sure that baby was mine? Or was it his?" The accusation hung in the room like poison. Then Cassian turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The moment the door slammed shut, Loa pushed herself away from Malachi's arms. Tears continued running down her face. Everything she and Cassian had shared over the years replayed in her mind. There had been a time when she truly believed they would spend the rest of their lives together. They had built a future side by side, supported each other through hardship, and celebrated every success together. But now all of it felt shattered. Everything she once treasured seemed built on lies. Malachi stood nearby, watching her silently. He wanted to comfort her, but he knew there were no words capable of easing this kind of pain. Loa's condition remained weak, and the doctors insisted she stay in the hospital for 5 more days. From that day forward, Cassian never returned to take care of her. Meanwhile, Malachi visited every day. He brought meals, checked on her condition, and made sure she had everything she needed. Yet Loa rejected every act of kindness. She no longer trusted any man, not after everything that had happened. She also chose not to tell her parents. The last thing she wanted was to make them worry or suffer because of her pain, so she carried the burden alone. After only 2 days in the hospital, she insisted on being discharged despite the doctor's advice. When Malachi returned to her room the next day, the bed was empty. For a moment, he thought she had gone for a walk somewhere in the hospital, but after searching several floors, he still couldn't find her. Uneasiness began to settle in. He hurried to the nurse's station and stopped in front of a nurse. "The woman in room 102, he asked. "Where is she?" The nurse looked up and immediately recognized him. For a brief second, she seemed flustered by the sight of the handsome man standing in front of her. She checked herself out this morning," the nurse replied. The answer hit him harder than he expected. Without another word, he turned and left. The nurse watched him walk away, unable to hide her disappointment. Malachi drove straight to Loa's house. When he arrived, he didn't get out of the car. He didn't ring the doorbell. He simply parked across the street and looked toward the house. For a long time, he remained there in silence before eventually driving away. Inside the house, Loa happened to notice the silver-gray car parked outside. She stood by the window and watched it for a moment. A small ripple stirred inside her heart, but it quickly faded. She was in no state to think about anyone else. The pain of losing her child and discovering Cassian's betrayal consumed every thought. Back home, she noticed that Cassian still hadn't returned. She knew exactly where he was and who he was with. Every time she thought about him, a sharp ache tightened in her chest. She had never imagined that the man she shared a bed with, the man she trusted more than anyone else, would one day hurt her this deeply. Slowly, a decision began to form in her mind. She would file for divorce. She wanted nothing from him anymore. One thing was certain, she could never accept this betrayal. The divorce papers sat on the table between them. Cassian had come home hoping that Loa would forgive him. He wanted her to accept the fact that he had a child with another woman. He promised that after the baby was born, he would give Nyla a large sum of money, end the relationship, and bring the child home for Loa to raise. He spoke softly, filling the room with apologies, promises, and sweet words. But every word sounded hollow to Loa. Did he think she was a child? He had betrayed her, destroyed their family, and now expected her to raise the child from his affair. The thought was absurd. She could never be that generous, not when her own child had died because of him. "Cassian, you're disgusting," she said coldly. "I can't live with someone like you. I can't share my life with something that's already been tainted." Seeing that she refused to accept his proposal, jealousy began to consume him. The image of Malachi in the hospital flashed through his mind. His expression darkened. He grabbed her shoulders and tightened his grip. "You want this divorce so you can be with him, don't you?" Loa looked at him quietly. She no longer had the strength to argue. "Yes," she answered. Loa was a deeply compassionate woman who cared about the people around her, but she also had principles she would never compromise. When she loved with all her heart. But she never held on to something that no longer belonged to her. More importantly, she could never forgive betrayal. To forgive a traitor would be like accepting a grain of sand in her eye and pretending it wasn't there. Did she still hurt? Of course she did. This was the man she had spent 5 years of her life with, the man she had trusted completely, the man she had given her love, her loyalty, and the best years of her life. He had betrayed her and taken away the child she had waited 2 years to have. If 3 parts of her heart were filled with hatred, the other 7 parts were still filled with pain. After the divorce, Loa moved out and started living on her own. She didn't return to her parents' house, nor did she tell them what had happened. She couldn't bear the thought of causing them pain or watching them worry about her. Instead, she chose to carry everything alone. For the past several days, she had been driving around St. Louis searching for an apartment, but every place she visited felt wrong. Some were too expensive, others were too far from work. A few simply didn't feel like home. Exhausted and discouraged, she returned to the office looking drained. During her lunch break, she quickly ate a piece of cake before heading back out to continue her search. Just then, a child ran up to her and handed her a flyer. Loa glanced down at the paper. An apartment was available for rent. The location was close to her office, and the rent was surprisingly affordable. According to the flyer, the owners were relocating overseas and planned to leave all of the furniture behind. They simply wanted someone responsible to look after the property while they were gone. Even though the apartment was located in a luxury complex with excellent security and amenities, the rent remained far below market value. Loa's eyes lit up. It felt like a lifeline appearing at exactly the right moment. Without wasting any time, she pulled out her phone and called the number listed on the flyer. The apartment had 2 bedrooms and came fully furnished. She could move in immediately. The owner seemed easygoing and trustworthy. They even told her she was free to rearrange the apartment however she liked. For the first time in weeks, Loa felt a little hope return. Maybe life wasn't closing every door after all. She was only 27 years old. Her future was still ahead of her. Determined to leave the painful memories behind, she threw herself into work. Day after day, she buried herself in projects, working longer hours than ever before. Not long afterward, an announcement spread throughout the company. A new CEO would soon be taking over. The position would be filled by none other than the son of the chairman of Vaughn Holdings. The news immediately became the hottest topic in the office. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering excitedly during breaks. "I heard he's incredibly handsome," one woman said enthusiastically. "He just came back from studying abroad. He's exactly the kind of guy every woman dreams about." Another woman quickly added, "Don't get your hopes up. He's still single, but apparently he already has a fiancé." That only made everyone more curious. "Who is she? What lucky woman landed him?" Laughter spread through the group before another employee lowered her voice and shared what she had heard. "From what I know, the woman is his adopted sister. The chairman and his wife adore her." The conversation continued, but Loa paid little attention. She wasn't interested in office gossip. As far as she was concerned, it didn't matter who became CEO. The only thing that mattered was whether the person had the ability to lead the company in the right direction. Around the same time, she finalized the lease for the apartment she had discovered through the flyer. The entire process went surprisingly smoothly. Everything seemed to fall into place without any complications. What Loa didn't know was that none of it was a coincidence. The apartment belonged to Malachi. After learning that she had left her marital home and was searching for a place to live, he quietly purchased the unit himself. He had arranged for the flyers to be printed and even asked a child to hand one directly to her. He never intended for her to know. He simply wanted her to have a safe place to start over. The following morning, the company's internal meeting began. Employees filled the conference room, eager to meet the new CEO. Loa sat in her usual seat, far calmer than most of her coworkers. She knew the purpose of today's meeting was simply to introduce the new executive leadership. There was no reason to be nervous. While everyone waited, the doors opened. At that exact moment, Loa accidentally dropped her pen. She bent down to pick it up. When she straightened and looked toward the front of the room, she froze. Standing there was a face she recognized immediately. The handsome man at the front of the room was looking directly at her. It was Malachi. Around the room, people noticed the strange exchange of glances. Some looked at the new CEO. Others looked at Loa. Yet Malachi acted as though they were complete strangers. His expression remained calm and professional. He shifted his attention toward her and asked, "Which department does that employee work in?" Loa stared at him, too surprised to answer. Before she could speak, another manager quickly responded, "Mr. Vaughn, that's Loa. She's the marketing director." Loa could only nod in agreement. Then Malachi spoke again. His voice was calm, leaving no room for discussion. "From today forward, Loa will serve as my executive assistant." The entire room fell silent. Loa's eyes widened. She looked at Malachi in disbelief. He looked right back at her. There was a faint challenge in his eyes, as if daring her to argue. The other executives exchanged confused looks, but no one dared question the new CEO's decision. "Does anyone have any objections?" Malachi asked as he scanned the room. No one spoke. "Good. Then this meeting is over. Everyone may return to work." With that, the meeting ended. The moment the meeting ended, employees immediately began whispering among themselves. No one understood why the new CEO had suddenly transferred the marketing director into the role of executive assistant. Questions spread throughout the office, but no one had any answers. Loa returned to her office, still trying to process what had just happened. Before she could make sense of it, Malachi appeared at the doorway. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "Shouldn't you be moving into your new office?" Loa looked at him in disbelief. "How can you just change my position like that?" she asked hesitantly. Malachi crossed his arms. "I'm the CEO. If I make a decision, employees follow it." His tone carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Loa wanted to argue, but she knew it would accomplish nothing. Reluctantly, she gathered her files and moved upstairs. After she settled into what she thought was her new workspace, Malachi glanced over and frowned. "That's not where you're sitting." Confused, Loa looked around. "Then where am I supposed to sit?" Without saying another word, Malachi pointed toward the intersection of his office. Loa followed his gaze and immediately felt her cheeks warm. She had spent her career managing departments and leading teams. Working directly inside the CEO's private office was completely different. When she walked in, she found a desk already prepared beside his. It was obvious the arrangement had been planned ahead of time. Throughout the day, she couldn't shake the feeling that Malachi was watching her. Every time she looked up, she found him looking in her direction. Then, whenever she caught him, he calmly returned to his work as though nothing had happened. More than once, Loa found herself studying his face. His sharp features, strong jawline, and focused expression made him difficult to ignore. Eventually, she realized she had been staring for several seconds. Without lifting his eyes from the documents in front of him, Malachi suddenly spoke. "Finished looking?" Loa immediately looked away. "What?" A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You like me, don't you?" Startled, she nearly dropped the papers in her hands. "No, I wasn't." She stopped and lowered her head. "Sorry. I didn't mean to stare." Malachi waited for something more, but nothing came. Deep down, he knew it was too soon. Years ago, he had loved her in silence. Even now, those feelings remained unchanged. Returning to Street Titi, Louis and finding her again just as her life was falling apart felt almost unreal. He knew she was still recovering from heartbreak. He knew she wasn't ready to open her heart to anyone. For now, helping her from a distance was enough. He wanted to protect her, support her, and give her the chance to heal. Everything he had done, the apartment, the flyers, the new position had been for her. He expected nothing in return. More than anything, he simply wanted Loa to find happiness again. And if fate ever gave him a chance, he hoped that one day she might choose him. Far away in Canada, a young woman's cheerful voice came through the phone. "Mom, I've booked my flight. I'll arrive in St. Louis at 4 this afternoon. I miss you, Dad, and Malachi so much." On the other end, a woman in her 50s smiled as she listened. "We miss you too, sweetheart. Everything has already been arranged. Once you're home, I'll make sure Malachi starts planning the wedding." The two women were Soraya and Mrs. Vaughn. 12 years earlier, Soraya had saved Mrs. Vaughn during a traffic accident. She had pushed her out of the path of an oncoming vehicle and nearly been hit herself. The driver never stopped. After learning that Soraya was an orphan, the Vaughns decided to adopt her. Over the years, they loved her as if she were their own daughter. More than that, they hoped one day she and Malachi would marry so she would remain part of the family forever. Later that afternoon, Soraya arrived at the airport in St. Louis. Wearing a flowing white dress, she ran toward Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn with a bright smile and wrapped them in a hug. After greeting them, she looked around hopefully. "Where's Malachi?" she asked. "Didn't he come to pick me up?" Mrs. Vaughn gently stroked her hair. "He just took over the company, sweetheart. He's busy with work. Let's go home. We've prepared a welcome dinner for you." Back at Vaughn Holdings, Loa was still adjusting to her new position. There were many parts of the job she didn't fully understand, and more than once, she wanted to ask Malachi for help. Yet every time she looked up, she hesitated. She would open her mouth, then change her mind and look back down. Although his eyes appeared focused on the computer screen, Malachi had noticed every one of her reactions. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Is there something you want to ask me?" Loa immediately looked relieved. Just as she was about to speak, he beat her to it. "Bring it over here." "How am I supposed to explain anything if you're sitting all the way over there?" She quickly picked up her laptop and walked over. As she stood beside him, a subtle masculine scent drifted toward her. It was distracting in a way she didn't want to admit. Malachi remained completely focused as he explained the problem step by step. Watching him work only made him more attractive. His confidence, concentration, and calm authority were impossible to ignore. For a brief moment, Loa found herself staring again before forcing her attention back to the screen. Eventually, she understood the issue and started to stand. Before she could return to her desk, Malachi reached out and gently caught her hand. His expression remained serious. "Do you really feel nothing for me?" Loa's heart skipped a beat. The truth was that he affected her more than she wanted to admit. Every time he came close, her pulse became unsteady. But memories of her failed marriage immediately surfaced. She thought about the man who had once promised to spend his life with her and then betrayed her. If someone like Cassian could change, how could she trust another man? What reason did Malachi have for loving her? What guarantee was there that he wouldn't hurt her too? She had already made one mistake. She wasn't the same woman she used to be. "No," she answered, pulling her hand away. "I just want to focus on work." Malachi released her hand without protest. He knew pushing harder would only make her retreat further. If he wanted her trust, he would have to earn it. He would wait until she felt safe with him, until she believed in him enough to lower the walls around her heart. Loa returned to her desk, but her face remained warm. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't focus on work. Her heartbeat refused to settle down. By the time work ended, dark clouds had already covered the sky. The air felt heavy, warning of an approaching storm. Since moving into her new apartment, Loa had stopped driving to work. The building was close enough for her to walk, and she liked having the chance to get some exercise. Not long after she stepped outside, the rain came down in sheets. Within minutes, she was completely soaked. There was nowhere nearby to take shelter, so she crossed her arms tightly and continued walking through the downpour. A silver-gray SUV slowly pulled up beside her. She immediately recognized it as Malachi's vehicle. Still, she kept walking without looking at him. Malachi lowered the window. "Get in. I'll drive you home." Rain splashed against the side of the vehicle as he spoke. "You'll get sick if you keep walking in this weather." Loa didn't even slow down. "Just leave me alone." Malachi stopped the car. A moment later, he stepped out holding an umbrella and walked straight toward her. He reached for her hand, intending to lead her into the vehicle, but she immediately pulled away. She refused to get in. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Malachi tossed the umbrella aside, wrapped an arm around her waist, and lifted her off the ground. "What are you doing?" Loa shouted. "Put me down." People passing by stopped to stare. Ignoring every protest, Malachi carried her directly to the SUV and set her inside before closing the door. Then he climbed into the driver's seat and drove away. To Loa's surprise, he headed straight toward her apartment complex without asking for directions. She thanked him quickly the moment they arrived and hurried upstairs. She assumed he had already left, but when she reached her floor, she discovered Malachi standing outside her apartment door. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I need to change clothes," he replied casually. "I got soaked because of you. Surely you're not going to throw me out before I can change." Loa hesitated. "I live alone." "It's not exactly appropriate." Before she could stop him, Malachi stepped inside. Then he turned and faced her. They were suddenly standing far closer than she expected. She could feel the warmth radiating from him. A teasing smile appeared on his face. "What exactly are you worried I might do?" Instantly, heat rushed to her cheeks. After changing into dry clothes, Loa thought Malachi would finally leave. Instead, he continued sitting on the sofa like a statue, showing absolutely no intention of going home. Feeling awkward, she finally spoke up. "You've changed already. You can leave now." "I'm hungry," Malachi replied casually. Loa's eyes widened. "Cook dinner for me." Internally, she couldn't stop complaining. How could this man be so shameless? He had already come into her apartment, changed his clothes, refused to leave, and now he was asking her to cook for him. Still, he had helped her many times before. In the end, she walked into the kitchen. "I live alone, so my meals are very simple. They probably won't suit the taste of a CEO like you." "I'll eat anything," Malachi replied, "as long as you cooked it." Loa's face immediately grew warm. She quickly turned away and busied herself in the kitchen. Throughout the entire time she cooked, Malachi sat there watching her without looking away. She could feel his gaze on her the whole time. Because of that, she kept her head down and focused on preparing dinner. Every now and then she glanced up, only to find him still looking at her. Each time, her cheeks grew hotter. After a long time working in the kitchen, she finally finished. 3 dishes were arranged neatly on the table. There wasn't much food, but everything looked carefully prepared. "You're actually pretty good at cooking," Malachi said. "I thought a spoiled rich girl like you wouldn't know how. You're underestimating me." Loa shot back. Malachi picked up his fork and tasted each dish one by one. The food was genuinely delicious. The two of them ate quietly. When dinner was over, Malachi gathered the dishes and headed toward the sink. Loa immediately stopped him. "Don't. I'll wash them." She was worried he might break all the few dishes she owned. Ignoring her protest, Malachi started washing them anyway. To her surprise, his movements were smooth and practiced. "You thought I didn't know how to do this, didn't you?" he asked. Loa instantly turned red but said nothing. "When I was studying in Canada, I cooked for myself all the time," he said. "I'm actually pretty good at cooking. One day I'll cook for you." As he spoke, he reached for plates, cups, and utensils with perfect accuracy. Loa frowned. "How do you know where everything is?" For a split second, Malachi realized he had almost exposed himself. "This apartment belongs to you?" Before he could answer, Loa followed up with another question. "Then whose apartment is this?" "Every apartment is arranged more or less the same way," he replied with a laugh. Loa didn't think much about it. At that moment, she was far more interested in getting this man to finally go home. Loa wanted Malachi gone as quickly as possible, but before she could say anything else, she suddenly felt unwell. Her eyes became red and heavy. She tried to ignore it and carried a plate of fruit over to the coffee table. Just as she set it down, dizziness hit her. The room spun around her. Her body swayed. Before she could fall, Malachi rushed forward and caught her. Alarmed, he pulled her into his arms and pressed a hand against her forehead. Her skin was burning. "Lo!" He immediately carried her into the bedroom and laid her gently on the bed. Then he grabbed his phone. "Kieran, get over here now. Someone's running a high fever." On the other end, Kieran groaned. "Do you even know what time it is? Just get here." "Fine, I'm coming." 5 minutes later, Kieran arrived at the apartment. After examining Loa, he frowned. 102.2. He glanced at Malachi. "That's a pretty high fever." An IV was started to help bring her temperature down faster. After half the bag had finished, Kieran checked again and finally nodded. "She's coming down." Then he looked between Loa and Malachi with a teasing grin. "So who is she?" Malachi didn't even look at him. His attention remained fixed on Loa. Kieran immediately understood. Before leaving, he flashed a mischievous smile. "Take it easy, Romeo. She's sick." Malachi shot him a warning look. Kieran laughed and left. By the time the IV finished, Loa's temperature had dropped significantly. Malachi considered sleeping on the sofa. But before he could leave the bedside, Loa suddenly began moving restlessly in her sleep. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. "My baby," she whispered. "My baby." Her voice cracked as she cried in her dream. Malachi immediately sat beside her and took her hand. Then he gently pulled her into his arms. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm here." Feeling the warmth around her, Loa gradually calmed down. Her breathing became steady once again. Thinking she had fallen back into a peaceful sleep, Malachi carefully tried to stand. The moment he moved, Loa wrapped her arms around him. "Don't go," she murmured. "Please don't go." Malachi's expression softened. He lowered his head and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. If only he had been brave enough years ago, maybe she would never have suffered this much pain. Holding her close, He eventually drifted to sleep as well. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window. Loa slowly opened her eyes and immediately realized she was lying in Malachi's arms. Panic flashed across her face. She pushed him away. "Why are you in my bed?" she demanded. "And why are you holding me?" Malachi opened his eyes. Instead of answering right away, he reached over and checked her forehead. Satisfied that the fever was gone, he finally replied, "You spent the entire night talking in your sleep and begging me not to leave. Now you're yelling at me?" Embarrassment flooded Loa's face. "I was sick. I didn't know what I was saying, apparently." She quickly escaped into the bathroom before he could say anything else. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Loa stared at her reflection for a long moment. Her thoughts were a mess. After washing up and changing into her work clothes, she stepped out of the bedroom. Malachi looked up immediately. "You're not fully recovered. Stay home today." "I'm fine," Loa replied hesitantly. "I can go to work." "I'm telling you to stay home." His tone left little room for argument. After a moment, she gave in. The truth was, she hadn't had a proper day to herself in a long time. Resting for one day didn't sound so bad. Malachi picked up his phone and called someone. "Bring over a bowl of porridge." After arranging breakfast for her, he grabbed his jacket and left. For the first time in weeks, Loa thought she might finally have a quiet day. Then the doorbell rang. Assuming Malachi had forgotten something, she walked to the door and opened it. "Did you leave something, Beh?" The words died in her throat. Standing outside was Cassian. Shock flashed across her face. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Why are you here?" Instead of answering, Cassian stared past her into the apartment. Jealousy burned in his eyes. "Who are you living with?" Loa's expression immediately hardened. "Who I live with is none of your business." Cassian ignored her response and grabbed her hand. "Loa, I know I was wrong. Please forgive me. Come home with me." She pulled her hand away. "What about your mistress and her child?" The bitterness in her voice was impossible to miss. Cassian lowered his head. "She lied to me. The baby wasn't mine." His voice became desperate. "After you left, everything started falling apart. My company is struggling. She left me and went back to the man she was seeing all along. The child belongs to him." He took another step closer. "Loa, I know what I did was unforgivable. But please, think about everything we shared. We had so many good years together." Before he could continue, Loa shook her head. "It's over, Cassian." As he spoke, Cassian suddenly stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Loa. She had only recently recovered from her illness and still felt weak. Despite struggling to push him away, she couldn't break free from his grip. "Cassian, let go of me," she shouted. "Please, Loa," he begged. "Give me one more chance. I can't live without you." Loa fought harder, but Cassian refused to release her. The more she resisted, the more desperate he became. Eventually, something dark flashed across his face. "Is it because of him?" he growled. "Is that why you keep rejecting me?" His hands tightened painfully around her wrists. Before Loa could answer, Cassian shoved her backward into the apartment. He pulled her against him and kissed her forcefully. "No!" Loa cried, turning her face away. "Stop!" Cassian ignored every protest. "You're my wife," he muttered. "You'll always be my wife." He pushed her down onto the sofa and began unfastening the buttons of her blouse. Loa struggled desperately, tears running down her face. But Cassian was stronger. No matter how hard she fought, she couldn't escape. All she could do was cry and call out for help. Malachi. Hearing another man's name only fueled Cassian's jealousy. He became even more aggressive. Then a cold voice cut through the room like a gunshot. "Get your hands off her." Both of them froze. Malachi stood at the entrance. In a flash, he crossed the room, grabbed Cassian by the collar, and yanked him backward. Before Cassian could react, Malachi drove a fist into his face. Cassian stumbled and crashed to the floor. Furious, he tried to fight back, but Malachi struck him again. Though Cassian was a large man, he was no match for someone trained to fight. After knocking him back, Malachi immediately removed his jacket and wrapped it around Loa's shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Seeing the concern in Malachi's eyes only made Cassian angrier. Convinced the two of them were involved, he lashed out. "So this is the truth?" he sneered. "You told me you only loved me. What? Turns out you're just another woman chasing money. You dumped me for him because he's richer, didn't you?" The moment the words left his mouth, a sharp slap echoed through the room. This time it wasn't Malachi, it was Loa. She stood there shaking with anger. "Who betrayed who?" she demanded. "Think back to everything we built together. I stood by you when you had nothing. You abandoned your wife, destroyed your own family, and caused the death of your own child. And now you expect me to forgive you? Tears streamed down her face. Every time I see you, I remember the baby I lost. I hate you, Cassian. Get out. Get out of my house! Malachi grabbed Cassian by the collar and dragged him outside, before slamming the door shut. The moment the door closed, Loa collapsed onto the floor, hugging a pillow against her chest. Sobs shook her entire body. Why had her life become so painful? Without a word, Malachi walked over, sat beside her, and gently pulled her into his arms. This time, Loa didn't resist. She buried her face against his shoulder and cried. Back at Vaughn Holdings, whispers spread across the office. A beautiful young woman had just walked toward the CEO's office. That's Soraya, someone whispered. Mr. Vaughn's adopted sister. Another employee lowered her voice even further. Not just that, she's supposed to be his future wife. The comments quickly spread from desk to desk. Before the executive assistant could announce her arrival, Soraya pushed open the office door herself. A bright smile immediately appeared on her face. Malachi, she exclaimed. I've been back for days and you still haven't come to see me. I missed you so much. She opened her arms as if she intended to hug him. Malachi didn't even look up right away. His expression remained cold. Why are you here during working hours? Soraya pouted. Mom told me to come. She wants us to start looking at wedding arrangements. She said the wedding should happen next month. After that, she wants me to work here and help you. Every sentence seemed to begin with the words, Mom said. Malachi finally looked up. At that moment, his eyes briefly shifted toward Loa. Meanwhile, Loa kept her attention fixed on her work, acting as though the conversation had nothing to do with her. Only then did Soraya glance toward her. Who's she? She asked. What department does she work for? Although her voice sounded polite, there was an edge underneath. In truth, Soraya already knew exactly who Loa was. She had been monitoring everything happening inside the company. Wait, she continued. You're Loa, aren't you? The former marketing director? Yes, Loa replied politely. Soraya smiled. Mom said I'll become Malachi's assistant soon. She made sure to say it loud enough for Loa to hear. Malachi's face hardened immediately. Enough, Soraya. Stop causing trouble. His voice turned colder. Any staffing decisions will be made by me. Now go home. I have work to do. Soraya's smile faded, but she didn't argue further. Eventually, she left. Although Loa never said a word, Malachi caught the disappointment in her eyes. He immediately understood what she was thinking. The trust he had worked so hard to build suddenly felt fragile again. All the old fears Loa carried about men had begun resurfacing. That evening, Loa returned home feeling emotionally drained. Soraya's words kept replaying in her head. When she opened the apartment door, she froze. Someone was sitting inside. A tall man in a perfectly tailored suit sat comfortably on her sofa. Startled, she quickly stepped back outside and checked the apartment number. It was definitely her home. Confused, she opened the door again. Malachi looked up. You're home, Loa stared at him. How did you get in here? A smile slowly appeared on his face. You're smart, Loa. Have you really not figured out who owns this apartment yet? Suddenly, all the pieces began fitting together. The flyer, the perfect apartment, the unbelievably easy lease process, everything. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all of this for me? She never got the chance to finish. Malachi stepped forward and gently pulled her into his arms. Because I love you. His voice was calm, but every word carried years of emotion. I've loved you since college. From the very first time I saw you. Loa stood frozen as he continued. He told her about the years he had spent quietly loving her. He told her how he had finally gathered the courage to confess, only to discover she was already with Cassian. He told her about the pain of watching her marry another man. He told her about leaving for Canada. He told her about returning and finding her in the hospital. The moment I saw you lying there, he said softly, I promised myself I would protect you. I wouldn't lose you again. His voice grew more earnest. Loa, I love you. Let me be the one who protects you. Before she could answer, he leaned down and kissed her. At first, Loa tried to pull away, but Malachi held her gently, refusing to let her retreat behind fear. Slowly, her resistance faded. The kiss deepened, carrying years of unspoken feelings. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Malachi rested his forehead against hers. You feel something too, don't you? Loa immediately looked away, her face burning. Don't you already have a fiancé? She asked quietly. Malachi explained everything. There would be no wedding. There never had been any promise from his side. If he ever got married, it would only be to the woman he truly loved. Even after hearing his explanation, Loa remained cautious. The wounds from her past had not healed. She wasn't ready to place all her trust in another man. Yet she also couldn't ignore one simple truth. Every time she had fallen, Malachi had been there to catch her. Every time she had been drowning, he had been the hand reaching down to pull her back to the surface. A major new project was underway at Vaughn Holdings. The deal was expected to generate billions of dollars in revenue, so everyone involved treated it with the utmost seriousness. Employees worked long hours, hoping to prove themselves and earn promotions. During an internal strategy meeting, Loa was assigned one of the most important responsibilities. She would lead the presentation and pitch the proposal directly to the client. The moment the announcement was made, whispers spread through the room. Some employees congratulated her, while others were far less kind. One woman muttered under her breath that Loa had probably slept with the CEO to receive such special treatment. Before Loa could react, her phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the screen and immediately froze. The caller claimed that her father had been rushed to the hospital. Her hands began shaking. Panic flooded her mind. She couldn't think clearly anymore. All she knew was that she needed to get to the hospital immediately. Seeing her pale face, Malachi stood up at once. "What's wrong?" he asked. "My father's in the hospital." Her voice trembled. "I have to go. I'll drive you." Neither of them wasted another second. They left the meeting and rushed out together. The moment they disappeared, a woman quietly entered Loa's office. She walked directly to the computer and started searching through the files. Eventually, she found the folder labeled Project ABC. A smile appeared on her face as she opened it. Seconds later, her smile vanished. The file was protected by a password and two-factor authentication. She spent several minutes trying different methods, but nothing worked. Afraid someone might return and catch her, she finally gave up and left. Meanwhile, Loa and Malachi arrived at the hospital. They hurried to the information desk and asked for her father's room number. The receptionist searched the records and frowned. "I'm sorry. We don't have a patient by that name." Confused, Loa immediately called her mother. "Mom, where's Dad?" she asked anxiously. Her mother's cheerful voice came through the phone. "Your father? He's sitting right here drinking tea and watching television." "Why?" Relief washed over Loa, but it quickly turned into suspicion. Someone had deliberately lied to lure her away from the office. Back at Vaughn Holdings, Loa and Malachi returned to work with growing suspicion about what had happened. Someone had clearly wanted her away from the office. As soon as she arrived, she checked her computer, but everything appeared normal. Thanks to her habit of protecting important files with multiple layers of security, nothing seemed to have been accessed. While they were trying to make sense of the situation, Soraya was carrying out a plan of her own. She picked up the phone and called Mrs. Vaughn. The moment the call connected, her voice became soft and tearful. "Mom, I think Malachi doesn't love me anymore." Mrs. Vaughn immediately sounded concerned. "What happened?" "I think he has another woman," Soraya sniffled. "People at the company are saying he's involved with his assistant, Loa." Her words instantly hardened Mrs. Vaughn's attitude. "Don't worry," she said firmly. "I've already made up my mind. Next month the wedding will happen. You're the only daughter-in-law I will ever accept." A satisfied smile appeared on Soraya's face, though she continued speaking sweetly into the phone. "I love you, Mom." After hanging up, Mrs. Vaughn immediately called Malachi. He glanced at the screen and already knew what the conversation would be about. He deliberately let the phone ring several times before answering. The moment he picked up, his mother's voice came through. "Malachi, on the 16th, you're taking Soraya to be fitted for wedding clothes." "I've already arranged everything." Malachi rubbed his forehead. "Mom, I've told you before. I only see Soraya as a sister. I don't love her. I can't marry her." "Then who do you love?" Mrs. Vaughn demanded. "That assistant? Loa?" Her voice sharpened. "I only accept Soraya as my daughter-in-law." Before Malachi could respond, she ended the call. When he lowered the phone, his expression was noticeably darker. Loa, who had been watching from nearby, stepped closer. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. "Did your mother say something?" "It's nothing," Malachi replied. He tried to sound casual, but the tension in his face remained. Loa sensed there was more he wasn't saying, yet she chose not to push further. She turned to leave, intending to return to her desk. Loa had barely taken a few steps when Malachi suddenly reached out and caught her wrist. Before she could react, he pulled her toward him. She stumbled forward and landed against his chest. Startled, she immediately looked around. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Someone might see us." "This is my office," Malachi replied softly. "No one comes in here without permission." His arms tightened around her waist. The familiar scent of her hair surrounded him, easing some of the frustration left behind by the phone call with his mother. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Loa could hear his heartbeat. The closeness made her nervous. Malachi, she began, but he leaned closer before she could finish. Stay with me, he murmured. No matter what happens, don't leave me. There was something unusually serious in his voice. Loa looked up at him. Before she could respond, his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but after years of suppressing his feelings, Malachi found it difficult to hold back. He deepened the kiss, pulling her closer. Loa's first instinct was to push him away, yet as memories of everything he had done for her surfaced, the hospital, the apartment, the countless times he had protected her, her resistance weakened. Slowly, she responded. Time seemed to disappear. Neither of them noticed how long they remained that way. Only when Loa began running out of breath did Malachi finally pull back. Even then, he rested his forehead against hers and refused to let her go. Her cheeks burned bright red. Unable to meet his eyes, she lowered her head. Malachi smiled faintly and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Remember what I said? He whispered. No matter what happens, don't leave me. Loa couldn't find the courage to answer. She simply nodded. Later that day, Loa's phone suddenly rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. She almost ignored it, but a small voice in the back of her mind warned that it might be important. Reluctantly, she answered. Hello? This is Malachi's mother, Mrs. Vaughn's voice came through immediately. I want to meet you. 11 o'clock today, Riverside Cafe. Don't tell my son. Before Loa could say a single word, the call ended. She stared at the phone for several seconds. Deep down, she already knew this meeting wouldn't be pleasant. Still, she decided to go. At 11 o'clock, she arrived at the cafe and immediately spotted Mrs. Vaughn sitting by the window. Loa walked over, greeted her politely, and took a seat. Would you like something to drink? Mrs. Vaughn asked in a distant tone. Orange juice, please, Loa replied before turning back toward her. Let's not waste time. What did you want to talk about? Mrs. Vaughn didn't bother hiding her intentions. I want you to resign from Vaughn Holdings and stay away from my son. By the end of this month, he'll be marrying Soraya. She's the only daughter-in-law I will ever accept. Loa listened quietly. Mrs. Vaughn continued. Besides, you've already been married once. How could someone with your past possibly be worthy of him? The words struck like knives, but Loa forced herself to remain calm. Tears gathered in her eyes, yet she refused to let them fall. Who Malachi chooses to marry is his decision, she answered softly. But I'm sorry, I won't resign simply because you asked me to. Mrs. Vaughn's expression darkened. What if I pay you? She asked. $5 million. Consider it compensation for leaving the company and walking away from my son. A bitter smile appeared on Loa's face. Seeing that smile only made Mrs. Vaughn angrier. What's so funny? She demanded. Do you think I'm joking? Loa finally lifted her eyes to meet hers. First, love isn't something people put a price on, she said calmly. Second, I don't need your money. And even if I were poor, I still wouldn't take it. The answer infuriated Mrs. Vaughn. She shot to her feet and raised her hand. Loa closed her eyes, bracing herself for the slap she was certain was coming, but the blow never landed. A hand had caught Mrs. Vaughn's wrist before it could reach her face. Startled, both women looked up. Standing beside them was Malachi. His expression was calm, but the firmness in his eyes was unmistakable. Mom, he said quietly, that's enough. Mrs. Vaughn's face darkened immediately. You're defending her? She demanded. For this woman, you're willing to oppose your own mother? Malachi released her wrist but didn't step away from Loa. I'm asking you to respect my decision. His voice remained even. I love Loa. She's the only woman I want to marry. The words struck Mrs. Vaughn harder than any argument. What did you just say? She asked, unable to believe what she had heard. I said I love her. Malachi didn't hesitate. And if I ever get married, it will only be to Loa. Mrs. Vaughn stared at him in disbelief. She had spent years planning a future between Malachi and Soraya. In her mind, that marriage had already been decided. Yet now her son was standing in front of her, openly rejecting everything she wanted. You're willing to throw all of that away for her? She asked through clenched teeth. I'm choosing the woman I love, Malachi replied. The answer only made her angrier. Loa stood silently beside him, overwhelmed by everything that was happening. Before Mrs. Vaughn could say anything else, Malachi gently took Loa's hand. We're leaving. Without waiting for permission, he led her out of the cafe. Behind them, Mrs. Vaughn remained frozen in her chair, her face red with anger. The moment they disappeared from sight, she slammed her hand against the table. Meanwhile, back at Vaughn Holdings, someone quietly entered Malachi's office. This time, the intruder walked directly to his computer. After several attempts, the correct password finally worked. The monitor lit up. The confidential files for Project ABC appeared on the screen. A smile spread across the woman's face. She quickly plugged a USB drive into the computer and began copying the data. Minutes later, the transfer was complete. She removed the USB, shut down the computer, and slipped out of the office without leaving a trace. The day of the presentation finally arrived. Standing before the company's leadership team, Loa confidently presented the strategic plan she had spent weeks preparing. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until news suddenly exploded across social media. Headlines claimed that Vaughn Holdings had stolen a project from another company. Reports spread rapidly, accusing the company of plagiarism and warning that legal action was being prepared. Outside Vaughn Holdings headquarters, reporters gathered in large numbers, waiting for comments from company representatives. The client involved in the deal quickly learned about the accusations and immediately suspended the project. They demanded an explanation. If Vaughn Holdings failed to provide a satisfactory answer, the partnership would be terminated and compensation would be required, according to the contract. Inside the company, rumors spread like wildfire. Many employees immediately blamed Loa. Some insisted she had copied someone else's work. Others eagerly added more fuel to the fire. "I told you she wasn't that talented," one employee sneered. "The only talent she has is getting close to the CEO." Another quickly joined in. "I saw her flirting with him myself. How else do you think she got promoted?" More and more people repeated the rumors. Before long, many employees were convinced she had stolen the project and caused the entire crisis. Standing nearby, Soraya listened quietly. A satisfied smile appeared on her lips. She pulled out her phone and placed a call. "Mom, have you seen the news?" she asked sweetly. On the other end, Mrs. Vaughn sounded furious. "That woman is going to destroy Vaughn Holdings. She only got close to Malachi so she could ruin the company." Soraya ended the call with a smile. A few moments later, she called someone else. "Don't you want your company back?" she asked mockingly. Whatever answer came from the other side seemed to satisfy her. She slipped her phone away and walked off. Loa couldn't understand how another company had obtained the project proposal. Only two people had access to the complete files, herself and Malachi. The thought troubled her deeply. Turning toward him, she asked quietly, "Do you believe I would do something like this?" Malachi met her eyes and answered without hesitation, "No." That single word eased some of the pressure crushing her chest. Right now, his trust meant more than anything else. As she replayed recent events in her mind, one detail kept bothering her. Not long ago, someone had tried to access her computer while she was away. At the time, nothing had been taken because the files were protected. Could it be the same person? When the technical department checked the security footage, another problem surfaced. The cameras had mysteriously stopped recording during the exact period when she and Malachi had left the office for the fake hospital emergency. It didn't feel like a coincidence. Someone had clearly planned this. "Do we have an insider?" Loa asked softly. The possibility sent a chill through her. While she worried, Malachi appeared unusually calm. He listened carefully but didn't reveal much of what he was thinking. Before either of them could continue, Loa's phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number. She answered immediately. Before she could even say hello, her mother's voice burst through the phone. "Loa, what have you done?" Her tone was filled with disappointment and anger. "Cassian came here. He told us everything. Your father is devastated. He wants you to come home immediately and explain yourself." Loa's face lost all color. Her mother didn't wait for a response. The call ended moments later. Slowly lowering the phone, Loa stood frozen. One problem after another kept crashing into her life. She felt as though she could barely breathe beneath the weight of it all. Seeing the pain on her face, Malachi stepped closer. Without saying a word, he gently pulled her into his arms. His hand rested on the back of her head as he stroked her hair. "I'll go with you," he said quietly. "We'll talk to them together." Exhausted and overwhelmed, Loa leaned against his chest. For the first time all day, she felt a small sense of peace. Somehow, whenever she was with him, the world seemed a little less frightening. The peaceful atmosphere inside the office didn't last long. The door suddenly swung open. Mrs. Vaughn stormed inside without even knocking. The moment she entered, her eyes locked onto Loa. Before anyone could react, she marched forward and slapped her across the face. The sharp sound echoed through the room. Loa staggered backward in shock. She hadn't even had time to understand what was happening. Mrs. Vaughn immediately raised her hand again. preparing to strike her a second time. This time, Malachi caught her wrist before the blow could land. "Mom, what are you doing?" His voice was filled with anger. "Since when do you hit people without even listening to the facts? Mrs. Vaughn jerked her hand free. "And you're questioning your own mother because of this woman?" She snapped. "Do you know what people are saying outside? The company is being dragged through the mud because of her." Loa lowered her eyes. She didn't want to argue. From Mrs. Vaughn's perspective, the accusations seemed convincing. Combined with the prejudice she already held against her, it wasn't surprising that she had reached the wrong conclusion. Malachi took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Mom, sit down," he said firmly. "Let me show you something. Everything will become clear." Mrs. Vaughn glared at Loa one last time before taking a seat. "Fine," she said coldly. "Let's hear what excuse you're going to make for her this time." Malachi picked up his phone and opened a video file. Then he handed it to his mother. The moment the footage started playing, Mrs. Vaughn's expression changed. Her eyes widened in disbelief. On the screen was Soraya. She was standing inside Malachi's office, accessing his computer and searching through confidential company files. Mrs. Vaughn stared at the screen in disbelief. The woman shown in the footage was Soraya. There was no mistake. She watched as Soraya sat at Malachi's computer, trying different passwords before finally gaining access to the confidential files related to Project ABC. For several moments, Mrs. Vaughn couldn't find her voice. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Why would Soraya do something like this?" Malachi's expression remained cold. "Do you remember the accident 12 years ago?" he asked. "Of course I do," Mrs. Vaughn replied immediately. "If Soraya hadn't pushed me out of the way, I would have been hit by that car." Malachi looked directly into her eyes. "Do you really think that accident happened by chance?" Mrs. Vaughn frowned. "What are you trying to say?" "It was planned." The room fell silent. Mrs. Vaughn shook her head. "That's impossible. She was only 12 years old." 12 years old doesn't mean innocent," Malachi answered. "Back then, I cared about her too. If I found something good, I shared it with her. If I received gifts, I gave her the best ones. But one day I overheard a conversation she thought nobody else could hear." He paused. "That's when I realized she had approached our family for a reason." Mrs. Vaughn still struggled to accept what she was hearing. Malachi continued. "I never exposed her because I knew neither you nor Dad would believe me. Instead, I watched and waited." His voice grew harder. "Soraya didn't come into our lives because she needed a family. She came because she wanted what our family had. Everything she did was part of a long plan." Even then, Mrs. Vaughn looked unconvinced. Seeing that, Malachi pressed a button on his phone. "Come in." The office door opened. One of the company's assistants walked inside. The moment he entered, his face turned pale. He lowered his head and avoided everyone's eyes. "Tell her," Malachi said coldly. "Tell her everything." The assistant's legs nearly gave out beneath him. Finally, he dropped to his knees. In a trembling voice, he confessed how Soraya had threatened and manipulated him into helping her. He revealed every detail of her scheme. With each sentence, Mrs. Vaughn's face grew paler. The young woman she had loved like a daughter, the girl she considered her savior, had deceived her for years. When the confession ended, Mrs. Vaughn said nothing. She slowly stood up and walked out of the office alone. After Mrs. Vaughn left, Loa turned toward Malachi with curiosity in her eyes. "How did you get that video?" she asked. A faint smile appeared on his face. He reached for her hand and gently pulled her closer. "The day we got that fake call about your father being in the hospital, I already felt something was wrong," he said. "Later, the technical team told me the security cameras had lost signal during the exact time we were gone." Loa listened carefully. "So you suspected someone inside the company?" He nodded. "I did. That's why I secretly installed another camera where nobody would notice it." Suddenly, everything made sense. "Then how did you know the assistant was helping Soraya?" Malachi leaned closer and lowered his voice. "This entire company is under my control, Loa." A playful smile touched his lips. "Including you." Loa's eyes widened. A moment later, her cheeks turned bright red. Before she could protest, Malachi pressed a light kiss against her lips. "Malachi!" she exclaimed, embarrassed. He only laughed. The evidence was quickly released to the media. News outlets that had spent the morning attacking Vaughn Holdings suddenly shifted their focus. New headlines exposed Soraya's actions and cleared the company of wrongdoing. The client was informed of the truth as well. After reviewing the evidence, they immediately resumed negotiations and agreed to continue the partnership. The crisis that had threatened the company disappeared almost as quickly as it had begun. For the first time in days, Loa felt able to breathe again. That evening, she returned home exhausted. All she wanted was a hot shower and a long night's sleep. She changed into comfortable clothes and stretched out across her bed. Her eyes had barely closed when her phone rang. Groaning, she reached over and answered without opening her eyes. "Hello?" A familiar female voice came through the speaker. "Can you meet me at Riverside Cafe?" Loa immediately recognized the caller. It was Soraya. Her brows knitted together. "I don't have anything to discuss with you. This is about Malachi," Soraya replied. Silence filled the line for several seconds. Then Soraya spoke again. "If you don't come, you'll regret it." Loa remained quiet for a long moment. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "Fine," she said. "I'll be there." When Loa arrived at the cafe, she had barely stepped out of her car when two men rushed toward her. Before she could react, one of them pressed a cloth over her mouth and nose. The sudden attack caught her completely off guard. Within seconds, darkness swallowed her consciousness. A vehicle pulled up nearby. The men lifted her into the back seat and sped away. The next thing she felt was cold water splashing across her face. "Wake her up!" a woman's voice snapped impatiently. Loa slowly opened her eyes. Her head throbbed. As her vision cleared, panic surged through her. Her hands and feet were bound. She was tied to a wooden pillar inside what looked like an abandoned building. The walls were cracked and stained with age. Dust covered everything. Standing in front of her was Soraya. Behind her stood 5 rough-looking men covered in tattoos. "Soraya," Loa whispered hoarsely. "Why did you bring me here?" Soraya burst out laughing. "Why?" she mocked. "You ruined everything I've worked for. What do you think I brought you here for?" Her eyes filled with hatred. "Today we'll find out exactly how much Malachi loves you." Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Malachi had been trying to reach Loa for over an hour. Every call went unanswered. Anxiety tightened in his chest. Then his phone rang. The screen displayed Soraya's name. His expression immediately darkened. He answered. "What have you done?" Soraya's laughter echoed through the speaker. "Want to know where your girlfriend is?" Before Malachi could respond, another voice suddenly broke through the line. "Malachi, don't come." It was Loa. Her words were cut off by a sharp slap. He heard her cry out in pain. Instantly, every muscle in his body tensed. "Did you hear that?" Soraya said with a satisfied laugh. "If you want her alive, prepare $50 million. On the other end of the call, Malachi could hear Loa struggling. "Malachi, don't come," she shouted. Before she could finish, another sharp slap rang out. "Shut up!" Soraya snapped. Malachi's jaw tightened. "If even a single hair on her head is harmed, you'll regret it." His voice was ice cold. Soraya laughed again. "We'll see about that. 4 o'clock this afternoon. The abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Come alone." Her tone hardened. "No police. No bodyguards. No tricks. If I see anything suspicious, I'll hand her over to my men." The call ended. Malachi stood motionless for a moment, then immediately grabbed a duffel bag and filled it with cash. After that, he called Kieran. "Loa's been kidnapped." Kieran instantly understood the seriousness of the situation. Malachi quickly explained everything. "I need you to contact the police. Have them follow from a distance. They don't move until they get a signal." Kieran cursed under his breath. "And you're going there alone?" "Yes." "That's insane. I don't care." Malachi didn't hesitate. "If something happens to her, none of this matters." A few seconds of silence followed. Finally, Kieran sighed. "Fine. I'll handle it." Malachi ended the call, picked up the bag of money, and headed straight for the outskirts of the city. The farther he drove, the fewer buildings he saw. Traffic disappeared. Empty fields stretched in every direction. In the distance stood a decaying house surrounded by weeds and overgrown grass. The moment he spotted it, his grip tightened on the steering wheel. Loa was in there. Malachi hurried toward the abandoned building. The moment he stepped inside, he saw Loa tied to a pillar. His heart clenched. Instinctively, he started forward. "Lo!" Before he could get any closer, Soraya raised a gun and pressed it against Loa's head. "Don't move!" she screamed. "One more step and I'll blow her brains out." Malachi stopped immediately. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His eyes never left Loa. "Don't be afraid," he told her. "I'm here. I'll get you out of this." Loa couldn't answer. Black tape covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes as she desperately tried to signal something to him. Soraya sneered. "Throw the bag over here." Malachi did exactly as she ordered. The duffel bag landed at her feet. She opened it and saw stacks of cash inside. A satisfied smile spread across her face. Looks like you really do love her. You got your money, Malachi said coldly. Now let her go. Soraya burst out laughing. Let her go? Her eyes turned cruel. Do you really think either of you is leaving here alive? She motioned toward her men. Two of them immediately rushed at Malachi. He fought them off with ease. One man hit the floor, then another. Seeing her advantage slipping away, Soraya shoved the gun harder against Loa's head. Stop fighting, she shouted. Or she dies. Malachi froze. He knew he could handle the men. What he couldn't risk was Soraya pulling the trigger. Slowly, he lowered his hands. Within seconds, several men grabbed him from behind and pinned his arms. Punches rained down on him. One struck his face. Another slammed into his stomach. A kick landed between his legs. Pain shot through his body. Blood trickled from his nose. Still, he refused to fight back. Loa watched helplessly. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Every blow felt like it was landing on her instead. Soraya walked over and slapped her hard across the face. Loa's head snapped to the side. A few moments later, Soraya finally raised her hand. Enough. The men stopped beating him. Bruised and bleeding, Malachi remained standing. The only reason he had endured everything was because Loa was still alive. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the air. One thug dropped to the ground, then another. Chaos erupted inside the abandoned building. Taking advantage of the distraction, Malachi twisted free, seized one of the men's arms, and ripped the gun from his hand. A second later, he fired into the legs of two more attackers. Both men collapsed screaming. The remaining thugs froze. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Standing there was Cassian. Shock spread across the room. Soraya stared at him in disbelief. Cassian? She shouted. You betrayed me? Cassian's expression was cold. I won't help a monster like you. Then he looked toward Loa. Regret flashed across his face. Loa. I know I've done unforgivable things. I don't expect your forgiveness, but this is the least I can do. Soraya's face twisted with rage. If I can't have what I want, none of you will. She spun toward Loa and pulled the trigger. No! Both Malachi and Cassian shouted at the same time. A shot rang out. For a brief second, everyone thought Loa had been hit. Then blood slowly appeared on Soraya's forehead. Her eyes widened in shock. She staggered backward before collapsing onto the floor. It wasn't Loa who had been shot. A police sniper had fired first. An Acasto, an Ippoliti. Moments later, officers stormed into the building from every direction. The remaining criminals were arrested on the spot. The overwhelming terror and stress finally became too much for Loa. Her vision blurred. The room spun. Then everything went dark. She collapsed unconscious. Malachi immediately rushed to her side. Cassian moved as well, but stopped halfway. He watched silently as Malachi untied her and lifted her into his arms. For a moment, regret filled his eyes. Then he stepped back. Without wasting another second, Malachi carried Loa to his car and sped toward the hospital. The doctors quickly examined Loa and reassured everyone that she was physically unharmed. The ordeal had simply been too much for her. The fear and emotional strain had caused her to lose consciousness. After several hours, she was transferred to a recovery room. Malachi remained by her bedside the entire time. He was so focused on her condition that he completely ignored his own injuries. Bruises covered his face, and dried blood still stained parts of his shirt. A familiar voice finally broke the silence. You're hurt too, you know. It was Kieran. Come with me and let me look at those injuries. Malachi didn't even glance in his direction. His eyes stayed fixed on Loa. Kieran shook his head and gave up. There was no getting through to him right now. A short while later, 4 people hurried down the hallway toward the room. They were Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, along with Loa's parents. Kieran immediately pointed them in the right direction. The moment they entered, they found Malachi sitting beside Loa's bed holding her hand. Before anyone could say anything, Loa slowly opened her eyes. Relief flooded the room. Loa, her mother cried, rushing forward. Are you all right? Seeing her parents, Loa immediately felt tears sting her eyes. Mom, Dad. Her mother grabbed her hands tightly. We're sorry. We should have trusted you. Cassian told us everything. Loa couldn't hold back anymore. She wrapped her arms around her mother and cried like a child. For the first time since the nightmare began, she no longer had to carry everything alone. Across the room, Mrs. Vaughn stood quietly. After a long silence, she walked over to the bed. Her voice was softer than anyone had ever heard before. Loa, I owe you an apology. Everyone turned toward her. I judged you unfairly. I blamed you for things you never did. I let my own prejudice blind me. She paused before continuing. Can you forgive me? Loa stared at her in surprise. A woman as proud as Mrs. Vaughn rarely admitted fault. Yet here she was, apologizing sincerely. A small smile appeared on Loa's face. It was a misunderstanding, she said gently. I don't blame you, Mrs. Vaughn's eyes immediately softened. She reached out and squeezed Loa's hand. Then stop calling me Mrs. Vaughn. Loa blinked. What? You should call me Mom. The room instantly fell silent. Loa's face turned bright red. Across the room, Malachi nearly laughed. Soon both families were talking at once. Some discussed wedding plans. Others joked about grandchildren. The room filled with warmth and laughter. Loa and Malachi exchanged embarrassed glances, but neither could hide their smiles. For the first time in a very long while, the future seemed bright. As for Cassian, he later visited Loa's parents and confessed everything. He admitted his mistakes and accepted responsibility for the pain he had caused. Though deeply disappointed, her parents eventually chose forgiveness over resentment. They encouraged him to learn from his failures and rebuild his life honestly. Cassian left carrying regret, but also a chance to start over. Meanwhile, surrounded by family, Loa and Malachi finally found the happiness they had both waited years to reach. The day Loa and Malachi got married was also the day Cassian boarded a plane, bound for a distant country to begin a new chapter of his life. Standing at the airport gate, he paused for a moment and looked out through the glass. A faint smile appeared on his face. I hope you'll always be happy, Loa. Then he turned and walked toward his flight without looking back. Meanwhile, the wedding of Vaughn Holdings CEO had become one of the biggest stories in the city. News outlets covered the event extensively, and a live stream attracted thousands of viewers online. Dressed in a beautiful white wedding gown, Loa walked hand in hand with Malachi across the stage. Guests couldn't stop admiring the couple. After everything they had endured, the two people who truly valued love, loyalty, and perseverance had finally found their way to each other. Standing beneath the warm lights, they exchanged vows and slipped wedding bands onto each other's fingers. When Malachi lifted her hand and kissed it, applause filled the room. For both of them, this wasn't just a wedding. It was the beginning of the future they had dreamed about for years. Later that night, the newlyweds finally found themselves alone. Soft candlelight filled the room, casting a warm glow across the elegant bridal suite. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other. After everything they had endured, it almost felt unreal that they were finally here together. Malachi gently brushed a strand of hair behind Loa's ear. You're my wife now, he said softly. A shy smile appeared on her face. And you're my husband. He pulled her closer and kissed her. The kiss was slow and tender, carrying years of longing, patience, and devotion. The world outside seemed to disappear. There were no more betrayals, no more misunderstandings, no more people trying to keep them apart. There was only the future waiting ahead of them. Eventually, exhaustion from the wedding caught up with both of them. Wrapped in each other's arms, they drifted off to sleep, with smiles still lingering on their faces. For the first time in a very long time, they slept peacefully. 1 month later, the dining table was filled with delicious food prepared for dinner. Loa had barely taken a few bites when a wave of nausea suddenly hit her. A sour taste rose in her throat. Her stomach churned uncomfortably. Without warning, she pushed back her chair and hurried toward the bathroom. Malachi immediately jumped to his feet. Loa? Hearing her getting sick inside, he rushed to the bathroom door and knocked repeatedly. Loa, are you okay? A few moments later, she stepped out looking pale. Before she could even explain what was wrong, Malachi had already scooped her into his arms. Malachi, she protested. I'm fine. He ignored her completely. Within minutes, he had carried her to the car and was speeding toward the hospital. While driving, he called Kieran. Get to the hospital. Kieran groaned the moment he answered. Do you realize there are hundreds of doctors in this city? Why do you always call me on my day off? Malachi didn't bother responding. By the time they arrived, Kieran was already waiting. After asking a few questions about Loa's symptoms and her menstrual cycle, he handed instructions to a nurse and ordered several tests. A short while later, the results came back. Kieran stared at the report before slowly walking outside. He deliberately kept a straight face. Seeing him approach, Malachi immediately stood up. What's wrong? He asked anxiously. Is she sick? Kieran handed him the ultrasound report. See for yourself. Malachi snatched the paper and looked down. The moment he read it, his eyes widened. Then he read it again to make sure he wasn't imagining things. Loa was pregnant. Not only pregnant, she was carrying twins. For several seconds, He simply stood there in stunned silence. Then joy exploded across his face. He rushed into the room, lifted Loa into his arms, and spun her around. "We're having babies," he shouted. "2 babies!" Loa laughed despite herself. "Put me down," she whispered. Everyone's staring. Only then did Malachi notice the nurses, patients, and visitors watching them. Most people would have been embarrassed. Malachi wasn't. Instead, he turned toward the crowd and grinned. "My wife is pregnant," he announced proudly. "We're having twins." For a moment, everyone stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Then smiles spread across the room. One by one, people began congratulating them. Holding Loa close, Malachi couldn't stop smiling. What had once felt like an ending had become a new beginning. Together, they were finally stepping into the future they had always deserved.